Kia ora, talofa, malolele, bunavanaka, and welcome to our second section on Alexander, which is the prelude. So everything before we actually embark on the story itself. So you can see here we've got 5 sections. There'll be a separate video for each one. We've got before the birth of Alexander, the rise of Macedonia, Alexander's birth and parentage, destined for greatness, Alexander's sex life, and then his appearance and his nature. So this video is going to deal with the first one before the birth of Alexander, which is where we are. So this is when we need to start. It just gives us some context around the Alexander the Great story. Okay, so stepping back quite a bit, we essentially have 2 civilizations. We've got Greece here, and then all of this is the huge Persian Empire. Now, the Greeks and the Persian had an interesting relationship. There was the well-known Persian Wars, which was the wars between Persia and Greece when the Persians attempted to invade and conquer Greece. They invaded, they certainly didn't conquer. And we have with Alexander the Greek invasion of Persia. But it's not as simple as the goodies and the baddies, as we might like to believe. Many of the Greek states would side with the Persians or would take Persians' money in wars against other Greek states. Sparta was guilty of that, Athens was guilty of that, Macedonia for quite some time was at least neutral, if not quite pro-Macedonian. So it's a little bit complex there, rather than just Greece versus the Persians, but for our purpose we'll just go with that at this point. So our story begins back in 490 BC with the Battle of Marathon. Now, the Persians had decided to invade Greece because Athens had helped out some Greek cities on the coast here. Here's mainland Greece. Here's the start of the Persian Empire, and there were some Greek cities on the coast here who were part of the Persian Empire. There was a revolt, some of the Greek cities that revolted against the Persians, and Athens had actually sent a ship in support of these Greek city-states in the Persian Empire. The Persians crushed them, but the Persians under the king Darius, he never forgot that the Athenians had been so presumptuous as to send aid, and he always planned to actually destroy the Athenians and in fact conquer all of Greece. So angry was King Darius, the king of kings, the king of Persia, that he had a servant whisper in his ear whenever he sat down to a meal. The servant would whisper in his ear, "Master, remember the Athenians." So in 490 BC, the Persians sent a navy to blockade Athens and defeat the Athenians. That was the plan. And they met at a plain just north of Athens called Marathon. Now, the Persians were absolutely wasted. They were defeated by the Athenians, who had a very, very clever battle strategy. Knowing that the Persian numbers were far superior to their own, the Athenians arranged their battle line to be weak in the center. So their wings were very heavy, but their center was weak. When they engaged the Persians, the weak center of the Athenians collapsed, obviously, and the Persians swarmed through, but what they hadn't envisaged was that the wings of the Athenian army were very, very strong, and they were able to surround the Persians and defeat them and chase them back to their ships. In fact, apparently it was a rout. The Persians were struggling back into their ships, and the Athenians are wading into the shallows, hacking at Persians trying to swim to their ships, hacking at the oars of the ships as well. The Persians got back onto their ships, and they thought, well, we've got one last go at it. We'll quickly sail around to Athens and try and defeat the city itself. The Athenians, having won at Marathon, they sent a runner to run back to Athens to tell them of the victory. And this runner ran the 42 kilometers over the hills back to Athens to deliver the news that the Athenians had defeated the Persians at Marathon. Hence, we have the Marathon, the famous race that many people, for some reason, decide to do. This is where it comes from. The Athenians were able to quick march back in time to get there around about the same time as the Persian fleet run to Athens, and the Persian fleet decided they weren't going to fight, and so they left. And so they were chased out. Now, the men of Marathon became quite a thing. Anyone who fought at Marathon was seen as a hero ever after. And the men at Marathon, as I say, was sort of the phrase for these men who had fought for the freedom of the Athenians against the Persians. But it was not to be over. 10 years later, the Persians returned, this time under Darius's son Xerxes. Xerxes led a huge land army that crossed here at the Hellespont, in modern-day Gallipoli, as you know, where the New Zealand troops were landed in World War I and fought and died. Xerxes led a huge army that came down through northern Greece, through Macedonia, to engage the major Greek cities in the center of Greece itself. Now, there's three famous battles. There's the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, where 300 Spartans held back tens of thousands of Persians at a narrow pass in Thermopylae. And they held them for 3 days. The Spartans were eventually defeated by the Persians, but if you've seen the movie 300, you'll know what I'm talking about here, led by the King Leonidas. They were defeated, but the 3 days gave the rest of the Greeks time to rally their forces and also set an example that actually the Persians could be defeated. I've been lucky enough to visit the site of the Battle of Thermopylae. There's a beautiful monument there with, as you can see, King Leonidas at the top. And there's our 24 Waitakere College students that we took there in 2019. There is a famous epitaph over where the Spartans fell, translated into English. It says, go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here according to their laws we lie. Next, 480 BC, the same year, was the Battle of Salamis. I guess bolstered on by the example of the Spartans, the Athenians resolved to engage the Persian fleet at sea. The Athenians actually abandoned the city of Athens. They left it to the Persians and retreated the whole city to an island off the coast called Salamis. And here it was similar to Thermopylae, really, but on the water. The huge Persian fleet was sucked into chasing some Athenian ships into the Narrows, and the small, fast, nimble, and mobile Athenian ships absolutely crush the lumbering Persians. It's quite a story, the Battle of Salamis itself. On the shore were the Greek women and the children and the elderly cheering on their menfolk, and this from the playwright Aeschylus, I think, sums it up. On, sons of Greece, for your wives and families, your temples and the graves of your ancestors. And there's many stories about how the Persians who were defeated in the sea battle, they tried to swim to the shore, and they encountered the Athenian women and children who would literally tear the Persians limb from limb, even grab an arm and grab a leg and rip their bodies apart, because they were fighting for their freedom. So it's the Battle of Salamis is a wonderful story, if you like, before the Persians being torn apart by the Greeks. And then we had the Battle of Platea the following year, where a huge united Greek army defeated the Persians on land. And then that was that. The Persians scuttled back out of Greece, back into Persia. Now, the Greeks had been victorious, but they never forgot this, because the Persian wars had killed thousands of Greeks throughout the Greek peninsula. Many cities had been destroyed, not the least Athens had been destroyed, and they desecrated the shrines of the Greek gods as well, the Parthenon on the Acropolis at Athens. So in the collective Greek mind was always a desire for revenge on these Persians for what they had done to Greece. But if you know anything about Greek history, you know the Greeks can never agree. So the very fact that the Battle of Platea there was a united Greek force was quite unusual, really, because the Greeks normally are busy fighting each other. And so while the collective Greek mind is we need revenge on these Persians, who is going to lead us? Who would take up that mantle of leading the Greeks against the Persians? So there we go. There's our first video in the Prelude of Alexander the Great.